takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Amanda Galbraith, and I'm an executive member of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Today, we're joined by Alberta's Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, the Honourable Doug Schweitzer. The Minister will speak to his province's economic recovery and how they plan to address growing and diversifying Alberta's economy as we move past the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we hear from our speaker, here's some information about how to participate with us today. The click here to switch stream button helps if you find that your internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality should remain strong. Once you click the questions tab, you can enter your questions in the window and they'll be sent to the moderator. The request help button located at the bottom right corner of the page is for technical support. Thank you to today's sponsor, EY. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit and we have been gathering people together for 124 years, as you heard in that video. It is because of our sponsors that we can continue to do that. Now to introduce today's speaker. The Honourable Doug Schweitzer was elected as MLA for Calgary Elbow in April of 2019. As Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, he is responsible for overseeing the implementation of Alberta's recovery plan, its sector strategies, and Alberta's growth agenda. Prior to this current role, Minister Schweitzer also served as Minister of Justice and Solicitor General. After his remarks, the Minister will be joined in conversation by Adrienne Batra, Editor-in-Chief of the Toronto Sun. One of the club's traditions that has not changed in this virtual world is the toast we make to our country. If you have a drink nearby, please raise your glass and join me for a toast to Canada. Minister, I'll turn the Canadian Club podium over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for participating here today. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to the Canadian Club of Toronto. Back when I was a young lawyer, I was involved with the Canadian Club out here in Alberta, and it's just a world-class organization across our country. So thank you for everything that you do to help pull together opportunities like this to engage in a discussion and dialogue about the issues facing our country and issues facing today. So first and foremost, though, I know folks in Toronto, I'm just glad that you guys were able to get up this morning. Your Maple Leafs last night. Consistency, I think, is the biggest thing about the Toronto Maple Leafs, is that consistency in the playoffs each and every year, finding a way in Game 7 to disappoint their fans. But let me know here in Alberta, we share in that disappointment. Our Oilers have got swept. So 0 for 4 this year in the playoffs. So again, this kind of goes, and Adrienne and I can maybe kind of muse a little bit about this. We both have some connection to Manitoba, but I think really right now, it's kind of that Go Jets Go type of banner should be put across this country right now. And so we're in solidarity with you in that defeat. And now we should all be cheering for those Jets instead of the Canadians. Anyways, but one thing that I saw, though, in this Canadian hockey playoffs, and when you contrast it with the United States, was the fans. We only in the last few games started to see some fans come into the Canadian arenas, whereas in the United States, we've got very full arenas. And that turns us to the topic of Alberta's plan to reopen for the summer. I remember, I'm a big baseball fan as well. I remember watching some games here recently with my kids and saying, Dad, why can't they go to games in the States? Why can't we do that here? When are we going to be able to do that in Canada? And I must say that with our Premier's leadership, we have set out a very clear reopening plan for the province of Alberta that's going to see us fully reopen, no health measures, other than around some hospitals and care facilities. When it comes to the timing of this is going to be around late June, early July. We plan on fully reopening. The threshold to get there is 70% of the eligible population, so 12 and up, receiving at least one dose of vaccine. And with what we're seeing based off of the data, this is based off of what we're seeing in Israel, the United Kingdom, the United States, is that there's a very low risk of hospitalization once people have received at least one dose of the vaccine. And we're going to continue to follow the science that's out there and get people their lives back. So if you're looking for an interesting summer, come on out to Alberta. The Stampede is going to be going this in July. We've got lots of events. The event industry is going to get going. But getting to the kind of our topic of today, getting to that reopening, getting our lives back here in Alberta and across this country is going to create thousands of jobs of people that have been laid off, event industry, the tourism sector. So many people have been impacted for over a year. So many small businesses have made massive sacrifices that we've asked of them. And it's time for all of us to be there, coming together, enjoying this summer as we fully reopen our country, particularly here in Alberta. We're planning on being the first in the country to fully reopen. Now, building on what we're trying to accomplish here in our province, when I took on this role of putting forward our recovery plan, we had two kind of big goals with this and the objectives. How do we build on Alberta's strong foundation? We've had a strong economy for decades. The last 5+ years have been challenging in Alberta, but we still do have a foundation here in our province that is resilient. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the trends that we're seeing in our traditional economy. But also, how do we diversify for growth? How do we take a look at what's happening in the new economy? And how do we position Alberta for long-term success? And there's lots of really positive areas here that we're seeing. Alberta's talked about diversification going back many premiers, 30+ years, but we're really starting to see it take hold in our province in a whole bunch of different fields, from the technology space, film and television, and the proof points are real with thousands of people working in these fields and growing exponentially. And we're going to talk a lot about that here in the coming points of our speech. So when we mapped out our plan, we wanted to make sure that we got the big picture right. And there's 3 core pillars to our recovery plan. The first pillar is around taxes, making sure that Alberta is the low tax jurisdiction in the country. So we accelerated our job creation tax cut, taking our corporate taxes from 12% down to 8% in Alberta. So we now have the lowest corporate taxes in the entire country by a mile. And when you take a look at what's happening in the United States with President Biden planning to raise corporate taxes down there, Alberta will be one of the lowest corporate tax jurisdictions in all of North America. There might be 1 or 2 states in the United States that could keep up with us. On top of that, we don't have a consumption tax. We don't have payroll taxes. We have low income taxes as well in Alberta. So we have that competitive tax advantage. That's key for us to make sure that we attract investment, grow our economy, give the Alberta businesses here that opportunity to flourish, but also attracting further investment into our province. Next key pillar of our strategy is around being an efficient government. Alberta had it good for many years, and we let our spending get out of control. We were literally the nail in the board in the country when it came to spending per person in Canada. And in this first term of our government, we're going to get our spending down to the national average for large provinces. That's a big undertaking. We're doing that in every single department. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your services are going to change on the ground. So one example that I like to use back when I was Justice Minister was that we were still using the fax machine as the most efficient way to file court documents if you couldn't get there in person to file them. Well, we've eliminated the fax machine. We brought in online filing programs and looked for different ways to provide the same or equivalent services better or more efficiently. And that's happening in every single department across the Alberta government. We simply have to look at ways of innovating. So that's one piece of the efficient government strategy. The other piece of it is around red tape reduction. So we have an associate minister of red tape reduction, and their mandate is to reduce red tape on businesses by 1/3. We're halfway through our mandate here in this first term, and we're halfway towards that goal. 16 to 17% of red tape in Alberta has been eliminated. This is over 100,000 regulations, forms, the redundant processes that we ask businesses to go through. So that is something that we're fixated on. We have to find ways to become the most efficient government possible in Canada. And just in the first year, I can't wait to see what the second year report has, but the first year's report has indicated that we've saved businesses in Alberta close to $500 million in employee time, filing fees, legal services, all of those things that go into meeting your compliance obligations. So we've reduced that by where our target is to get it to 1/3. We're halfway to that goal, halfway through our term. So the big focus for us is around efficient government. Next part is around strengthening our workforce. And this all comes down to talent, and more talent. So recently we launched our Jobs Now strategy. This is going to cover up to 25% of the first year of wages to hire back Albertans that have been unemployed. A big part of our strategy here is to help with the training costs. When you bring on a new employee, there's a training cost that goes into that. We want to reduce all of those barriers. So we're covering up to $25,000 of that first year wages in Alberta. It's a $370 million program that we just launched. It's a big part of our strategy to get people back into the workforce. If they need a new skill set, a little bit of training, it helps alleviate that cost for businesses across our province. Next piece of our talent strategy is around internships. So we just recently launched with our MyTechs, is over thousands of internships across Alberta, lots of different industries that are going to take advantage of that program. Getting our second make sure they get that work experience. Next piece as well that we're reviewing right now is around immigration reform. So historically, when you're thinking about Alberta, we had lots of labor pressures when the oil sands were booming. We had, that temporary foreign workers was really a big focus of our immigration strategy. And now looking forward, we want to make sure we position our immigration strategy in Alberta around that talent strategy. And there's a global race for talent, particularly in the tech sector and that entrepreneurial sector. And we want to make sure we position our immigration strategy around innovation, around entrepreneurs, around graduates. So look for more details to come from Alberta as it relates to immigration in the next little while. Just notes are sticking together here. So turning the page into building upon our foundation for the future. So many people know about Alberta, our large energy industry, agriculture. Many people don't know that we also have a very large forestry industry. So when you take a look at these commodity-driven markets that we're heavily involved in, they're all right now pointing in the right direction. Energy prices, WTI barrel of oil is over $65 US yesterday. You've got natural gas prices are high. Ag prices last year were up over 40% year over year. Ag prices this year are looking strong. Lumber prices, if you go and build a deck right now, you'll know lumber prices are one of some of their highest levels that we've ever seen. So the conventional drivers of Alberta's traditional economy are all pointing in the right direction for significant growth and also efficiency and profitability for our province. So when I said earlier on that this is the most optimistic that I've been about Alberta's economy since 2014, there's lots of reasons why. And a lot of this has to do with the traditional drivers, but there's lots of diversification happening as well as we look at building on that foundation. And we talk about the economic forecast, from Desjardins, BMO, Conference Board of Canada, all forecasting that Alberta is going to lead the country in GDP growth and job creation. And a lot of that has to do with the conventional drivers of our economy. But when we were building out our recovery plan, we didn't want to just rest there. We didn't want to say, that's good enough. We're just going to keep doing what we've done historically in Alberta. We've looked for lots of new ways to make sure that we can build on our strengths for the future. And one strategy that we've launched with our Minister of Energy is around our mines and minerals strategy. Alberta had it so good for so long in oil and gas that we didn't even scratch the surface on other mineral opportunities that are here in Alberta. And with the growing prevalence and demand for rare earth minerals, or critical minerals, as people call it, and the tension between the United States and China, there's an opportunity for Alberta to continue its leadership role in responsible development of resources in these fields. We're putting an immense amount of resources into bitumen beyond combustion. If you take a look at the minerals that are in 1 barrel of bitumen, the minerals that are actually outside of the conventional oil and gas minerals are worth more. So we're looking at how do we extract those minerals responsibly, making sure that we can service the battery demand that's out there, carbon fiber demands, the smartphones that require the resources that we need, as well as in the United States, their military security as well requires these minerals. So there's a big role for Alberta to play. And just to kind of give you a sense of us building on that technology and the infrastructure we have here, there's a company called E3 Metals. They're literally taking lithium right out of active wells in Alberta. And as many of you know, lithium is critical for all those areas of the new economy that are developing. We have companies as well that are developing technology to take hydrogen with filters right out of active wells. We have other companies as well leveraging horizontal drilling technologies that were developed in Alberta for geothermal energy. So we brought in place a whole new geothermal regulatory regime, infrastructure here in our province. And they're planning on heating providing power to over 1 million homes this decade. So a lot of those traditional economic drivers of Alberta, we're looking at building on in new technologies, new ways to leverage our leadership as an energy leader when it comes to the development of new technologies, new opportunities, new job creation right here in Alberta. We also want to make sure that we get the most out of our natural gas. So on this front here, our Minister of Natural Gas has launched effectively a 4-pronged strategy. Obviously, we want to make sure we get LNG to international markets. That's key. We want to continue to do that. It's going to displace coal. It's going to be good for the whole world. It's going to reduce global emissions. We have to get that done. But that doesn't mean that that's all that we can do with our natural gas. There's a leadership role for Alberta to play in petrochemicals and the life cycle of plastics. So we put in place a brand new petrochemical incentive to attract investment and allow us to compete with New Orleans and other places in North America that have competitive tax regimes. So we brought in place a brand new tax structure that's going to allow us to attract billions of dollars of investment into our petrochemicals industry. But we also want to be there for the full life cycle of plastics and also petrochemical products. And that's where we're going to be a leader in recycling as well. We want to be there for the full life cycle of these products. Historically, we would put our products in the blue bin, but a lot of municipalities would ship these goods overseas to be recycled. Those opportunities are diminishing, and there's a role for Alberta to play as a leader in recycling. The next area of this strategy, and I actually find this one the most exciting, is around clean hydrogen. And this is where Alberta, if you take a look at the infrastructure, the workforce, the land formations that we have, Alberta is one of the best placed jurisdictions in the entire world to develop out clean hydrogen. And this is where we're putting an immense amount of resources, developing out the strategy, working with the federal government as well when it comes to carbon capture. And Alberta, let me put this clear, Alberta has the technology, Alberta has the ESG record, and Alberta is going to continue to be a leader in energy, and clean hydrogen is a huge part of that strategy overall. Now, here's one area as well as part of our energy mix that may be surprising for people from across Canada, is that Alberta is leading the country in the investment in renewable power. And it's not through government subsidies. It's by the fact that we have a private sector driven power market in Alberta. We're unique. We decided that the fact that we're going to let entrepreneurs do what they do best, and they're investing in renewable power in Alberta. We're having batteries put onto our grid. We're having solar farms going up, wind farms going up in Alberta. And now, why is that happening? Big corporate players around the world are committing to going to net zero by 2050. And because of the unique position of Alberta's marketplace, they want to make sure that they can achieve that with our entrepreneurial spirit of Alberta. So we're seeing significant investments coming into our power market right here in our province. This is also leading to opportunities with data centers, lots of ways to attract investment into Alberta. Again, this is just happening organically with the fact that we have these entrepreneurs that are out there taking advantage of our private sector driven marketplace in Alberta. Now, turning the page to how do we diversify and grow for the future? And this is an amazing story that's really kind of turned the corner in the last 2 years, is around Alberta's maturing tech sector. And just put this in context for the size and scale of the growth. In 2018, Alberta had about 1,200 tech companies. Fast forward 2 years to 2020, we now have over 3,000 tech companies in Alberta. So not only did we grow 150% in 2 years in technology companies, those companies are also larger as a percentage. So the pie is growing when it comes to the number of employees that they have, the amount of financings that they've done. And to kind of put that financing in context, in 2018, we had $100 million going into venture capital. 2019, $220 million. 2020, $455 million going into venture capital. That made up 10% of the deal flow in Canada, 10% of the deals in Canada. So when you're talking about our percentage of our population and diversification, when I mentioned earlier on that it's real and it's tangible, you have thousands of people now in Alberta now being employed in our technology sector. And every single month, we're seeing new financings, new companies coming in, hiring hundreds of people year over year, going from 20 people 1 year to 250 the next. And that's happening right now in Alberta. There's a whole laundry list of these companies that are being successful. So last year, when we were looking at this emerging part of our diversified economy, we put in place our Innovation Capital Working Group. They gave us lots of recommendations. One of them was around immigration that I mentioned earlier on, attracting that global talent to Alberta. Two other things that they highlighted for us, access to capital. So we put an additional $175 million into the Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which is a fund of funds to attract venture capital into Alberta. We also put in place the Innovation Employment Grant to cover up to 20% of research and development for our tech sector. And early 2021 is looking like it's going to be our best year ever, even potentially destroying our record from last year. In the first quarter alone, we had over $220 million of investment going into venture capital just in our first quarter. The trajectory of our tech sector in Alberta is immense, and you're likely going to see some announcements here in the next little bit about global players looking at Alberta with new insight for this opportunity. Earlier this year, we had a company, one of the largest technology companies in the world called Infosys, announced that they're setting up an office in Alberta, creating over 500 jobs. And we're expecting that's the beginning of a trend. So again, I don't want to kind of presuppose some things that are likely to come up here in the next few weeks, but there's amazing investments that are coming here from some of the biggest players in the world. Alberta is now a player when it comes to technology innovation in that conventional sense. But this is just building on our foundation. Alberta has always been an entrepreneurial hub for this country. We simply focused historically on the energy sector. That's where a lot of our innovation went, from unlocking the oil sands, SAGD, carbon capture. All of these technologies have been developed in Alberta with that innovative lens. And I've seen now, like I'm in my early 40s, and when I started my career in Alberta in the mid-2000s, there was that entrepreneurial drive that a lot of it was going into the energy sector. But now you're seeing this next generation of leaders, this next generation of entrepreneurs in Alberta with that same ambition of going out to take on the world, applying it in so many different fields, from clean energy, agricultural technology. We've got this in fintech as well in Alberta. So lots of areas for Alberta to continue that entrepreneurial leadership, that drive. For those of you that aren't as familiar with Alberta, I've traveled lots in Canada. I was a lawyer, a partner at a big firm before. The culture here from an entrepreneurial standpoint is unique in Canada. They have a mindset that they're going to go out there, they're going to take on the world. And Albertans are starting to get that done. They put up a barrier. Albertans will find out a way to go there and be successful. One other area that we're seeing a huge amount of growth when it comes to building and diversifying our economy is around film and television. So when I took on this position, we were whiteboarding, saying, look, what are the opportunities for Alberta? How can we attract more jobs and investment? We see that, British Columbia, they've got a big film industry. Vancouver's one of the largest hubs in the world. We've got Toronto, they're doing really well in the film and television industry. We've got these huge growth trajectories with HBO and their online streaming. You got Disney, you got Amazon. All these different platforms are deploying billions of dollars around the world. How can we capture some of that pie into Alberta? So we met with these players. We met with HBO, Disney, Warner Brothers, all of these folks, and asked them for feedback. And it all came down to taxes. It all came down to tax structure. Where these projects happen largely is being driven by the accountants. So we fixed our tax credit in Alberta. We're now very competitive, and we're on track for one of our best years ever in film and television. There's lots of rumblings out there in the media about the largest television series ever done in Canadian history coming to the province of Alberta. And we're hoping to be able to finalize all of the details around that here in the next little bit. But if this thing goes forward, and it looks like it will, it'll create thousands of jobs in Alberta. We're starting to see private sector driven film studios going up in the city of Calgary. This is a big part of our diversification strategy. It also plays into our tourism strategy. So we took a look at countries like the United Kingdom, where they leverage Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, all these different other productions to attract people to come and visit their country. And we want to leverage that as well with our film and television industry to make sure that people continue to come and experience the amazing vistas and views, the cultural experiences of our province. So again, we want to make sure that we leverage our beautiful national parks we have here. The highest visited national park in the entire country is right here in Alberta with Banff. Again, we want to make sure we highlight that beauty and continue to attract people to come into our province. Now, I just want to leave my remarks here just on a kind of one last theme, and I'm really looking forward to the Q&A that we're going to get into. But this is what I think the story of the second half of the year is going to be for the province of Alberta is our rebound. We are well positioned. As I mentioned earlier on, the fact that we're forecasted to lead the country in GDP growth, in job creation, the fact that energy prices are at their highest and looking to be the most stable in a long time, both in oil and in natural gas, agricultural prices at record highs. We got lumber prices at record highs. The traditional economy is going to be going on full cylinders here in the province of Alberta. On top of that, the diversification that I mentioned, and the fact that we're seeing huge growth in our technology sector, the film and television industry. We're seeing job creation in areas that Alberta typically did not have, even 2-3 years ago. And that's happening right now in Alberta. The other thing too, and this is the highlight. So if there's any executives on here, one thing that I'd highlight for you is that not only are we creating the right corporate environment for you, making sure we lower our corporate taxes, making sure we reduce red tape, but we want you to think about the future of your employees and how your employees can get ahead faster. Let's take a look. If you're a young person looking to make it in Canada, Toronto housing prices, 1.5 million on average, thereabouts. Alberta, suburb house, probably bigger than what you can get for 1.5 million in Toronto, $500,000. Plus you have the quality of life of Alberta in the cities like Calgary and Edmonton that rank in some of the highest rankings globally for the quality of life of these cities. The infrastructure of Alberta is second to none. Take a look at a city of 1 million people like Calgary. This is where I am today. I'll use it as an example. Brand new arena forecasted, brand new libraries downtown, brand new highway right around the city. You get one of the most visited national parks in the entire country, attracts global visitors, is an hour away. This is a quality of life value proposition in Canada. So right now, Alberta is a complete buy when it comes to the opportunities that we're seeing. And we're starting to see, particularly with this pandemic, the disruption that's happened in our workplaces. So they used to say when I was a lawyer that if you want to be in finance, you had to be on Bay Street. You had to be there. But Bay Street's been closed now for over a year. People have been working from their homes. The employees have an immense amount of control over where they want to be, how they want to live, and how they want to get ahead. And Alberta is that place where people can still get ahead in this country. It has amazing opportunities ahead. We're seeing huge growth opportunities for us in a whole bunch of new fields. So I want to leave you with that thought. Alberta is the place to be for our young people and for employees that want to get ahead in our country. It's there for all of Canada. We want to welcome you. We want to make sure we continue to grow and be that economic engine for the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And yes, I appreciate the fact that you acknowledged our big Leafs loss last night. So we do feel the pain of the Edmonton Oilers, but go Jets go, I guess is all we can say at this point. I want to recognize sort of a very positive attitude that you have brought to today's Canadian Club podium. June 1st is a significant day in the province of Alberta. You have moved into what is dubbed as phase 1. The province is beginning to open up. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what got you there. Many of your chief medical officer has signed off on Premier Kenney's plan to reopen Alberta. And there have, however, been some criticisms that your government is not prepared for what could potentially be a fourth wave, that perhaps you are moving too quickly. So I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to some of the forthcoming challenges by reopening.
Well, this is all based off of the data that we're seeing coming from countries that are ahead of Canada when it comes to vaccination. So taking a look at Israel, the United Kingdom, the United States is a perfect example as well of lots of different policy options that have been explored in state by state in the United States. But the one thing that we're seeing, and this is being proven out both anecdotally when you talk to doctors in our hospitals, plus by the stats, is that once people have received the first dose of the vaccine, 2 weeks later, after those antibodies build up, the risk profile of them going into hospitals diminishes incredibly. So I think it was a recent report that came out that showed that of those people that had received their first shot that did end up in hospital, over half of them were in that first 2 week period of time. And even then, it was a much smaller percentage overall than just the general public that had not received their vaccine. So this is based off of data. It's based off of the science. And it's simply time to give Albertans their lives back. So we're basing this off of that 70% threshold. It's going to be when we fully reopen. Once we get to 70%, we wait the 2 weeks for the vaccines to fully kick in. And then Alberta is open for summer. Health restrictions are gone.
Let's expand upon that just a little bit further. You mentioned in your remarks, Minister, about the world famous Calgary Stampede. I've been there, and I'm sure many people on that have joined us today at the Canadian Club have been to the Calgary Stampede. It's one of the best events that happens. This year, you are open for that. It could lead to some trepidation by individuals not to necessarily come. One of the biggest components of what you've talked about in terms of Alberta's economic recovery is hinged on opening and opening safely. So for those that are planning on traveling and potentially coming to Alberta for the Stampede, what would you say to them?
Come to Calgary, come to Alberta, experience our amazing Calgary Stampede. We're working right now with the organization. The Calgary Stampede is like a year-round endeavor to get it organized every single year. We've just given them the notice that they can fully reopen here just a week ago, if we hit to our certain benchmarks, which we're anticipating that we will. Again, we want to work with them. I wouldn't expect that this year is going to be the full Stampede experience that you would have had back in 2018 or 2019, but it's going to be a reopening. It's going to send that signal. And the one thing too that I think all of us have to have is that compassion for Canadians. We've been gone through a pandemic here for over a year, and many people are going to be anxious. There's going to be some people that they wanted this to happen months ago. They wanted just to go, but there's many others that are anxious. So I think it's just compassion. Do what you're comfortable with doing. But in Alberta, we're reopening and people are going to be free again to make the decisions for themselves.
I'm old enough to remember, Minister, when it was referred to as the Alberta Advantage. And you referred to many of the tax structures and policies that your government has implemented and carried on through previous governments. But specifically with the tie to the United States and the corporate tax levels, you're speaking to an Ontario audience of people in Toronto. The goal, I would presume, is to lure some people to and their businesses and their clients to come to Alberta, to establish there. So the challenge inevitably is always within, finding those opportunities and creating that environment. Though the United States is planning on increasing their corporate tax rate, the criticism for Alberta is that you've reduced so much that it's had public services have suffered in order for you to create this tax advantage. How do you respond?
Well, I think the first thing, when I was talking about our efficient government strategy, I think that's a perfect example. Alberta had it good for decades. There's no doubt about it. We were leading the country in massive GDP, per capita, all of these things. But we let our spending get way higher than everywhere else in Canada. And what our focus here in our efficient government strategy is simply bringing Alberta's spending per capita, spending per person, down to the big province average in Canada. So we have to get more efficient. And one thing that I noticed, I came from the private sector. So coming into government role, I just noticed that there was things that being done in the Alberta government that you simply would not do in the private sector. For example, that I mentioned, the fax machine. The example that we actually had, fax machines is the most efficient way. And you should see these people. They're amazing at organizing paper. It's straight out of the 1970s. They take paper from one place, they got stationery. It's just amazing to see how efficient they are in the 1970s work environment. But we're going to take them into the present day and making sure that we leverage technology, provide better advancements there. Leverage the private sector as well to make sure that we're creative in how we procure services. We've got P3 arrangements. Alberta, we want to make sure that our government is efficient as well as innovative to make sure we provide the services that Albertans deserve.
I think there would be a lot of people that would be surprised to know that Alberta is not just about oil and gas, even though when we think about that great province, that's all people think about. And with that comes our ongoing argument and challenges, not only just in the courts, but with the protests about pipelines and pipeline development. There is still a great opportunity for us to help develop our natural resources in the province of Alberta and other provinces, of course. But recently, your government has renewed a piece of legislation that was brought in by the previous NDP government, and that has been dubbed the Turn Off the Taps legislation. For starters, Mr. Minister, what does that mean? And why should people in Ontario and Quebec care about that?
Well, this bill is all about making sure that we can control our own destiny when it comes to developing the resources here in Alberta. Particularly earlier on when we had other governments that were fighting our ability to get to market access. Right now, it appears as though the BC government has exhausted its options, in particular in challenging the development of the TMX pipeline in courts. But we're seeing now the fact that we still need to be able to control our own destiny. This is a matter that's going through the courts right now. There's the constitutional questions that go along with it. And we want to make sure that we preserve our ability in Alberta to control our own destiny in developing out our resources. This could went into lots of different areas. But now that we're on the topic of pipelines, again, we're starting to see development. TMX looks like it's on schedule, on budget. That's encouraging. There's a pipeline called Line 3. Again, that looks like it's going to be on schedule later this year. But the one thing that I think we have to start raising awareness around, and this is going to be a huge impact for Ontario, people in Toronto, I think there's a limited awareness around it publicly, is around Line 5. So this is a pipeline that's been in existence going back decades. The governor of Michigan is looking to terminate the license for this pipeline. That would cut off an immense amount of the supply at the pumps for people in Ontario. you would see a massive impact on Ontario's ability to recover coming out of this pandemic if Michigan is successful in terminating the permits for that pipeline. It's currently going through the courts in the United States. We're fighting over jurisdiction. We're unified with the federal government in keeping that pipeline. But again, this is a huge economic issue for all of Canada when it comes to Line 5, because we in Canada, we need Ontario to be successful. We need Quebec to be successful. And that pipeline is critical for their economic recoveries.
We're getting a lot of questions in from our audience, so thank you for that. Keep them coming. I will get as many questions to the minister as I possibly can. Mr. Minister, an audience question is with respect to the Employment Standards Act, not only that governs the province of Alberta, but of course federally as well. What advice do you have for those employees that don't get vaccinated? What are their rights under the Employment Standards Act?
So, I mean, I'll defer to my Minister of Labour and all the specifics of the acts that he has. But here in Alberta, I mean, we're not forcing, no one's being forced to be vaccinated. No, I don't think anybody in Canada is being forced to vaccinate. The one thing that we're focused on, though, is the science. And the science focuses on herd immunity. So that's why we've set our threshold at 70%. We know that we're never going to get to 100% of our population vaccinated. There may be a health reason, and there could be personal convictions as to why someone may not choose to get a vaccine. That being said, I've had my first dose, and I encourage everyone to get it. But you know what, when it comes to Alberta, it's focusing on the science here. And when it comes to vaccines, we want to make sure we keep the population overall healthy, and that's the herd immunity strategy.
So let me follow up with that then, Mr. Minister. What is your government's position on a potential of a vaccine passport?
You know, on that front there, I mean, when it comes to inside in Alberta, I mean, this is we're focused on, again, on the science, that 70% threshold. Health restrictions come off in Alberta. I know that the federal government is looking at different ways of allowing people into Canada. Alberta was at the forefront in doing a pilot project at the Calgary International Airport to shorten that quarantine time with rapid testing when people came into the country. Right now, we're working with the federal government as well to see if Alberta can be a leader in our international airports and letting people come back safely into Canada. Some of the elements of that plan would include whether or not they're vaccinated. So whether or not that's a vaccine passport, there's lots of different definitions of vaccine passport. But as it relates to our borders, there's an element there which makes sense for us in getting our borders open faster.
A question that has come in from an audience member is sort of follows up on what I was about to ask, and that is with respect to inter-provincial trade barriers. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that those barriers exist and still exist, even though there are some provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba that have been working together to try to bring some of those barriers down, but they still remain. We'd like to know what is it that not only Alberta is doing to bring down some of those trade barriers, but are there opportunities to work with other provinces, other jurisdictions in order to have a free flow, easy flow of goods across from coast to coast in Canada?
You raise an amazing point here. Like, people wouldn't appreciate when they look at us from the outside and from outside of Canada, all of the barriers that we've set up in province to province to province. And obviously, our premier was focused on this before the pandemic with a huge amount of leadership in reducing those interprovincial trade barriers, unilaterally taking steps in Alberta. And before the pandemic, we were having lots of conversations with other provinces about potentially expanding out. You know, the Western bloc that we have here, where we're trying to create free trade and bring other provinces in. I'd love to see long term if we could get Ontario into that free trade bloc that we have and other jurisdictions out west. I'm not sure if Quebec will join us or not, but you know what? If we put together enough of the country, they may join that initiative as well making sure we have free trade across this country.
I think I heard Premier Kenney and frankly, even former Premier Notley talk about a strong Alberta as a strong Canada. And I think often that gets forgotten about in the to and fro and the push and pull when it comes to some political issues, fighting with the federal government. But it's moving beyond from oil and gas as just the strength and talking about the diversification of Alberta's economy. I know you touched on some of this in your comments. And so let's expand upon some of the specific areas where Alberta is continues to have that shall we say, advantage, or at the very least growing? I know you mentioned in the tech and innovation sector with so many new companies on the books, but what about other areas? You also mentioned film, the film industry. So let's sort of break those apart. Let's talk about, for starters, the clean technology sector that seems to be burgeoning in Alberta.
Well, when it comes to clean tech, there's one program, and I encourage people to Google it. It's called Avatar. It just got launched here by a former oil and gas drilling executive. He's partnering with some of the largest energy companies in Canada, but also taking advantage of their young employees. A lot of young employees in the oil and gas industry, they want to find different ways of solving the world's problems. They want to be a part of that ESG solution, that push that we're seeing around the world. And this new Avatar initiative is being designed to highlight that intellectual capital that we have here, the number of engineers that Alberta has, the scientists that we have, the geologists, the chemical engineers, all the different things that make up the Alberta workforce, but helping give them the opportunity in kind of an incubator, accelerator type model, similar to Toronto's Mars program, but in clean energy and that focus there. So lots of opportunities there. And I do think that they can actually be one of those leaders. I'm not sure if you saw Elon Musk launching his big fund for carbon capture, but Alberta has some of the most successful projects on carbon capture. There's no reason why Alberta couldn't be a leader in winning prizes like that carbon capture initiative that was launched by one of the wealthiest individuals in the world.
So let me follow up on that, Mr. Minister, with this. And that has to do, of course, with what is called the new economy. And if COVID has taught us anything, we know that things can be done differently. We have a lot of, as you mentioned in your speech, employees having the opportunity to work in a different environment, mostly from home, and not necessarily going into a bricks and mortar type of office. So, but with that, there has been a massive negative impact, particularly on women throughout the global pandemic, where they've lost their jobs. Where is the province of Alberta with respect to retraining, education, and investments that bring people into the new technology, into the new economy?
Well, on this front here, this is one of the big focuses of our Jobs program. So we went out and consulted, particularly with this fast-growing technology space that we have in Alberta, and we asked them what would help retrain people, reskill them, give them that ability to get back into the workforce and compete. And this ability for us to provide up to $25,000, 25% of that first year wages, was designed to help companies in that position take somebody that's really smart. So let's say you're a geologist in Alberta, but you want to try something different. In order to become a geologist, you are a data scientist to get to that level. And just more taking that really smart math brain and giving them the skill sets that they need and the opportunity they need to get their foot in the door for further opportunities. And again, that's just one of the pieces that we're doing. We're also working closely with our post-secondary institutions. We launched a 2030 strategy here with practical skill sets. A lot of it's apprenticeships, shortening the training time as well. So this isn't going to be the only time we go through disruptions in our workforces. It's going to continue to accelerate for decades to come, and just continue to accelerate the disruption. But how do we shorten that reskilling and retraining period for somebody that's already gone to university? How can we narrow it down to 4 to 6 weeks? We've got a new program with the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, launched a downtown campus that's focused on how do we reskill, train as fast as possible people that are there for those jobs of tomorrow and that reskilling that's needed.
One of the hardest hit sectors throughout COVID, of course, has been our not only retail, but our restaurants and that industry. As I said, today, June 1st, is an exciting day in the province of Alberta. Walk us through sort of a day in the life of now. What is open? Are the restaurants, are they able to go beyond just curbside pickup and beyond just getting our food delivered through an app? Where are things as of today?
So as of today, patios are open in Alberta. It's a beautiful day. It's going to be about 25 degrees out there across the province. So patios are open right now in Alberta, and we're expecting in about 10 days' time, we're also going to go back to in-dining service as well. And if we continue with our trajectory of getting that 70% threshold by the end of this month, thereabouts, full reopening of restaurants and bars in Alberta.
I guess we only need to head to Alberta because it's still all locked down here in Ontario.
It's an open invitation.
And sometimes it feels like there's no end in sight. But are schools open in Alberta?
Yes, schools right now are fully open across Alberta. There's a couple areas where we had higher concentrations where they're a little bit slower. We did send our students home for a 2-week period of time in May, but schools right now are open across Alberta.
There is a number of questions that are coming in, and I think it's based on some of the comments that you made with respect to the film and TV industry. I recently watched Yellowstone on Prime, and I loved it. And I think, the next season of that show could be easily shot in the province of Alberta because it's ideal environment for it. But I think a lot of us are curious what this new show that you were talking about Netflix, but maybe can't reveal it, but maybe we'll try to pry that out of you. But the industry does require an extraordinary amount of taxpayer investment, and that comes through the tax credits. And making yours healthy and generous makes it challenging for the other provinces to compete with that. So how have you just landed on your structure within the film and TV industry to make Alberta that attractive?
So there's lots of different ways that you can structure these. There's labor-driven ones. There's all cap, all expenses ones. So it depends on how you want to position it. We're not the most generous in the country, but we want to make sure that we were competitive and that we could at least compare apples to apples, particularly with British Columbia and Ontario, to attract productions into Alberta. We have a 22% for productions that are outside of the province coming in. It's a 22% credit for Alberta-generated content, materials ownership. It's a 30% credit. Very similar structure, kind of conceptually to other provinces as well, having that kind of that organic local market-driven piece as well.
When you're looking at all the different sectors and all the potential growth, again, it's all hinged on opening. It's same for Alberta as it would be for Ontario or any other province, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. It's all contingent upon a safe, strategic reopening strategy. And so with that, you must look at where your significant amount of quick growth would be and in what sector that would be in. Do you guys have any sense of the job creation numbers? Are you looking at this area is going to have faster and quicker development than others? Can you unpack a little bit of that for us?
Well, I think the biggest area that we're going to see the rebound immediately is going to be in this, food services, restaurants, the tourism industry, transportation as well. WestJet's, has it headquartered here in Calgary. Those are the types of jobs that we're going to see that immediate rebound come and getting people back to work. Thousands of people have been unemployed for the vast majority of this pandemic in those areas, and we need to get them back to work as fast as humanly possible. So that's kind of job number one. And right now, Alberta's unemployment rate is sitting around 9%. We want to get that down as fast as possible, down into the 7%, 6% category, which would be much more healthier for where we are as an economy. We want to do that as fast as possible. There's lots of work to do here. But also, the one thing just to highlight, and this is another reason why I think the second half of this year is going to be very strong for Alberta, is energy prices. So with WTI sitting in the mid $60 range US, the energy companies in Alberta have become so efficient over the last 5+ years that they are incredibly profitable at this level. They're generating billions of dollars of revenue. We actually could see some of the highest levels of energy revenue in Alberta's history this year. So with that, they have some decisions to make in the second half of this year. Is it share buybacks? Is it dividends? Or are they going to reinvest in the future? And we're anticipating that many of them will probably do a balance, but many of them are going to be reinvesting significantly into Alberta's energy market here and getting a lot of people back to work.
So you're not going to tell us the name of the show? I tried.
You know what? If you check out the Hollywood Reporter, there's an HBO show that they're musing about in the Hollywood Reporter. So that'll be as much as I kind of tip our hand.
We'll do some research and talk about that. We just have a few minutes left, and I still have a couple of questions that I wanted to put to you from the audience. And in and around, again, COVID putting such a fine point and exposing so many things, not only within our healthcare system, but certainly within our preparedness, our PPE, what we have done with our frontline workers, and whether or not we were ready and not ready. We'll put some of that aside for a moment, but let's talk about the broader picture, and that's with respect to the pharmaceutical industry. We know certainly that the Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, take your pick of whichever vaccine, these companies are going to be generating billions of dollars. Where is Alberta with respect to its pharmaceutical development and industry? We know that part of the challenge with us getting the vaccines in Canada was that we didn't have the development. But a little known fact, there is a place in Alberta that can do that very thing. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and this is one of those unknown secrets of Alberta that most people don't know about the province, that we actually have a Nobel Prize winner at the University of Alberta in virology, which develops out things like vaccines. So we're actually right now, we've asked for proposals into the province of Alberta. We're reviewing them right now for how can we be better prepared in developing out the pharmaceutical industry and the vaccine space in particular, longer term. Some of that will be in the research and development side at the University of Alberta or other universities, but also in development and manufacturing of vaccines. So there's a role for Alberta to play. The federal government as well has budgeted about $2.2 billion to build up further capacity across Canada. And Alberta has a role to play, in a leadership role to play in this exact area. And this is the thing, we've actually invested in this for over a decade. And now the fruit of that investment is really starting to take hold, and there's an opportunity for Alberta to further diversify its economy in the pharmaceutical space.
Minister, I would be remiss if I didn't get a little political with you before we wrap up. There's a growing level of frustration out west to the point where a new party has formed, Wexit. There is frustration with the federal government from not only Alberta, but certainly from my home province of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and others feel disconnected to the national government. We could be on the heels of a federal election. What do you say to the Liberal government to regain that trust with Western Canada, partnering with Alberta, for example, on resource development? What do you say to the federal government?
Well, I think on this front here, having been in two different files in 2 years, when I was Justice Minister, it was far more of a combative role in many respects. We were launching challenges in court. We were taking on the federal government on different policy issues on a regular basis. Now I'm into this other role of jobs, economy, and innovation, where we're trying to find alignment with the federal government. Where can we work together on solving the challenges longer term for our province? The biggest thing and feedback that I would have is that the frustration on the prairie provinces of, particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan, is real. It's tangible, and in many areas it's justified. People feel as though their government isn't necessarily representing them. They feel as though they're kind of left in a different generation of where our federal government wants to go. And I think that there's a lot of leadership that needs to be done at the federal level in engaging those people. Those are hard conversations to have sometimes coming into those communities. But I would encourage, federal cabinet ministers in particular to go out and tour rural communities across the prairie provinces. And when it comes to the failure, it's not just economics. People like to focus on the oil and gas industry and the economy that's there, but it's also in crime. This is the one thing that, and when I was Justice Minister, we did get rural crime on the national agenda. Our justice policies are designed for a very urban setting. They're designed for downtown Toronto, think gangs. They're designed for that type of environment, or the criminal justice system is. Whereas if you go into a rural community, these people do not feel safe. A police officer could be 45 minutes to an hour away from getting to their home. And with meth in particular, that drug, it is creating havoc across rural communities where there's an immense amount of crime, violence happening in rural communities. So these individuals that are there, not only do they feel as though their economic security is being compromised, but their own personal safety. And that is the bargain that we have as a society with governments, is that ability to provide for yourself, your family, and feel safe. And a lot of those areas have been kind of turned on their head, particularly in the last 5+ years across these communities. Some of it is, again, safety, some of it's economic, but it's real and it's tangible. And I was a Calgary lawyer. I didn't fully appreciate the challenges and compromises to help that criminal health element to them for that personal security until I went out and toured. So I would encourage the federal government to get their ministers, get their MPs out there into these communities, because that frustration is tangible and it's justified in many respects.
Minister Schweitzer, I really want to thank you for taking our questions and being a good sport about being here with us. The Canadian Club podium is yours anytime, so please come back. And thank you to our audience for such great questions. I think that there was a great opportunity to talk about a whole breadth of issues. And I would like to hand it back to Canadian Club's Executive Member, Amanda Galbraith. Oh, I think Amanda's muted.
Hi, can you hear me now? Jeez.
Yes, we sure can.
14 months in, I'd have that. I was all ready to go. All right. Well, thanks, Adrienne, for that. Thank you, Minister. Thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. Minister, as Adrienne mentioned, I found that upbeat. I found that exciting. And I think as we all sort of stare down the barrel of lockdown here in Ontario, it's great to see others of the province reopen. It's great to hear that Alberta is reopening for Stampede. I myself have attended and loved the event. And that your economy is poised to sort of fire on all cylinders. I know Adrienne said Alberta is a strong Canada, and I think we echo that here in Toronto. I certainly feel that way, and I speak to my colleagues that are Navigator offices in Edmonton and Calgary. They've been talking to me a lot about the diversity of the economy, even tech and film and clean tech. So it's exciting to hear about those new challenges and new industries as they blossom in Alberta and continue to grow. Adrienne, as always, you're a pro. It's wonderful for you to have you join us and your skilled moderation. Thank you again. And guests, we hope you'll join us for some of our upcoming events. So this Thursday, June 3rd, we will host a discussion on Indigenous leadership in business featuring Tabitha Bull, Clint Davis, and Matt Jameson. They will be discussing increased Indigenous participation in the economy, improved industry Indigenous partnerships, and the opportunities that are provided as part of Canada's revitalization and growth efforts. This conversation strikes me as particularly timely given the national conversation I think we must continue to have about how we can do more to support our Indigenous communities. So please attend that. On Monday, June 7th, the club will welcome former President Danny Asif for the release of his new book, Say Please and Thank You and Stand in Line, One Man's Story of What Makes Canada Special and How to Keep It That Way. It's an inspiring conversation you won't want to miss. Thank you again to EY, our sponsor for today's event. Our event would not be possible without our generous sponsors, so thank you for your continued generosity. Thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and LiveMeeting.ca for making it possible to come together virtually today. Guests, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and safe.